This is my ultimate hybrid photo video camera setup, but more about this beast later on in the video. So what are we going to talk about in this video? Well, we're going to talk about camera choices, lens choices, accessories for hybrid shooting, lens filters for hybrid shooting, the setup of your camera, and the difference between all the settings you can choose. And of course, the perfect camera settings for hybrid shooting. And you will face problems when shooting hybrid. So I've made a separate chapter about how to avoid those problems or how to solve those problems. I will explain everything in very great detail. For that reason, I chopped the whole video in chapters. So if you're looking for a specific chapter or a topic about hybrid shooting, you can look it up in the description of the video. If you cannot find it in the description of the video, just let me know in the comments. Like, hey Roy, I can't find a certain topic about hybrid shooting, and I can point you to the right direction in that video. Or you didn't get any answers to your question, please let me know and I will make a separate video about it, or I can explain it in the comment section. That's no problem at all. So in case you don't know me, my name is Roy. I've been shooting hybrid since 2010. I travel the world as a hybrid photographer, a hybrid wedding photographer actually. I do hybrid photo and video. I give workshops for Canon, masterclasses and presentations at universities about hybrid shooting. I work a lot with Canon, like I said, big brands, camera brands, and when I started out in 2010, I was just using my camera in every way possible, and included video. So I shot video and photo with the same camera. It was more like a gimmick back then in the cameras, and I wasn't really thinking about it in a commercial way. I just wanted to express myself, not knowing that hybrid shooting would be so big as it is right now. I'm going to treat this video a little bit the same as a workshop or a masterclass, so I like to start this video in the same way I start my workshops, and that is with this. The only thing that's limiting your hybrid shooting is you. What is the best camera for hybrid photography and video? Well, that depends on a couple of things. Are you going to use one or a two camera setup? Is photo more important than video, or is video more important than photo? So are you a photographer that wants to shoot video, or are you a videographer that wants to shoot photo? Or do you want to make an equal balance like I do? I think they're both the same for me. Of course, your experience is also very important. How experienced are you at photography or on video, or both of them? So the basic requirements for the camera is that the camera has a manual setting. So the camera should have a manual photo setting and a manual video setting. So manual adjusting every setting. So if you're watching this video and you're like, well, my camera doesn't have a manual video setting, only a manual photo setting, I cannot watch the video. Well, you can. You can watch this video, it's no problem, because you will learn a lot of this video, you'll learn what you need for camera. Because I think there's a lot of useful information in this video about hybrid shooting and photography in general. And don't forget, I started in 2010. So the camera I had was, let me check, was this one. This is a Canon 5D Mark II. I shot hybrid with a Canon 5D Mark II. This isn't a hybrid camera at all. To activate the video function, you have to go into the software and put it on video to shoot video. But I still did it anyway. And just to show you that even a camera that's 17 or almost 18 years old can do hybrid, you definitely can do it with your camera that's like 2 years old, 3 years old. The photographer or the person using the camera is the most important person. For this video, I've made a list of hybrid cameras that are great for hybrid shooting. I've put them on the screen so you can see if your camera is between those or you need to buy a new camera. But I have to give a little disclaimer because the video will age. There will be new firmware versions and software versions for your cameras. Settings may change of cameras. For instance, my Canon R5, when it first came out, it was a hybrid camera, it was built for hybrid shooting. But for me, it had a lot of problems while shooting hybrid. But now, after all those firmware versions, it's a great hybrid camera. I would recommend the R5, still the old one, for hybrid shooting. But in the beginning, I had a lot of problems with this camera. If you want to be sure if your camera has the functions you need, go to your local camera store, ask if those functions are on the camera. If they don't know, test it out. Sometimes they say yes and they aren't sure, so be sure that they say it's possible or they show you it's possible. Like I said, the way you shoot hybrid depends on different things. So first, are you going to use one or two cameras? If you use one camera, it's very easy. You need a full dedicated hybrid camera. You need a camera that can shoot photo and video, and for both of it has a manual mode. Preferably, I like a camera that has a programmable button. The programmable button is a button you can pre-program video settings to. And you may be thinking, but How do you know what settings to use before you even start a shoot? Well, that is one of the things you're going to learn in this video. If you use one camera, you can put it in photo mode. And when you press record, the record button, it instantly starts recording video. And if I take my R5, I press the recording button, I press it and it starts shooting video, even when I'm in photo mode. That's a very important feature when you are shooting hybrid, when you can switch from photo to video. I think it's mandatory for hybrid shooting so you can switch between photo and video very easily. Of course, if you take a camera like the R5 Mark II, it's purposely built for hybrid shooting. But there are cameras that are less expensive that have the same functions as an R5 Mark II. To be clear, I'm using my Canons because I shoot Canon. You saw a list on the screen for other brands. The same goes for every brand. When you go higher up in the camera quality, you will get a camera that has better functions. But the basic cameras nowadays all have the same hybrid settings. If you go for a 2-camera setup, you could choose one camera for video and the other camera for photo. So one camera shoots video and the other shoots photo. The great thing about the setup is that you have a dedicated video camera with a dedicated lens for video and a dedicated photo camera to shoot photo, with of course a photo lens. So instead you could use 2 cameras that both shoot photo and video, but with different lenses. For example, one camera with a prime lens and the other one with a zoom lens. You can mix it up. The important thing is that you can shoot with one camera or with 2 cameras. One camera is also a little bit simpler in my opinion. This is also very important about your camera body. I think it's also very important for your hybrid camera to have a dual memory card slot. So you can choose a backup card. So this way it makes 2 backups of your footage, your photos and your videos. Because memory cards can fail, will fail, and to have a backup is very, very important. You don't want to mess around with software to get your data back. It's a nightmare. You also want a camera that can shoot log. Log is something I will explain later on in the video. I will tell you everything about what it is and what you need. You do not strictly need it because I started with a camera that couldn't shoot log because I was just trying stuff out. But if you want to go to the next level, I don't want to switch cameras after a year or 2 years. I think to have a camera that shoots log is just better. It's simply better. And that brings us automatically to lenses, because a lot of what your camera body can do leads to the lens. What is the best lens for hybrid photography and video? When you are a photographer, you usually choose a lens that's good for photography. It's purposely built for what you want to do with it. When you are a videographer, you want to use a cinema lens. It's for shooting cinematic shots. When you want to combine those two, it gets a little bit more difficult. So let me break down why. So what is a cinema lens versus a photo lens? A photo lens can focus really fast. It's instantly sharp or not sharp. It's on or it's off. It is made for still moments, capturing a single moment. It also works with your autofocus. So when you autofocus on something, you press the shutter and you instantly have a very sharp photo. A cinema lens is built for smoothness. The focus change has a very natural feel. It's made for controlled movement. There's a lot to explore between sharp and unsharp. That's what makes cinema lenses so cool. When you move from a sharp point to a unsharp point or from a different sharpness point, the cinema lens does it very well. And it's also very silent if you compare it to a photo lens. So what do you need from a lens in a hybrid setup? First, what you need is focal length variation. You want a lens that is wide, like a 24 to 35 millimeters. You want a medium range, so that's about 35 to 70, 85 millimeters. And you want a detail or zoom lens, that's about 70 to 105 millimeters. And we love low aperture numbers for that beautiful bokeh. And if you have the budget, you can do this with 2 cameras. For example, 2 prime lenses. One camera is a 35 millimeters and the other is a 85 millimeters. I shot hybrid like this for a very long time. On my right side a 35 millimeters, on my left side a 85 millimeters or a 50 millimeters. Both cameras were photo and video cameras, and I switched between them while shooting. I love prime lenses for many reasons. The downside is if you want to zoom, you have to move forward, backwards, etc. But I still like and love the look and the simplicity of prime lenses. You could also use a single camera with a zoom lens that has a wider aperture. Think of a 2.8 or even f2 aperture. As long as your lens can do a wide shot, a medium shot, and a close or flash zoom shot. But times are changing. Canon released a range of hybrid lenses. Prime lenses like a 20mm, 24, 28, 35 and even a 50mm with f1.4 apertures, and also released hybrid zoom lenses like a 24, 105, a 70, 200mm. They are purposely built for hybrid shooting. When you put the camera in video mode, you'll get smoother aperture changes and it's more silent. And that's what you want when shooting video. And my guess is you'll see more of this in the coming years. Not only from Canon, but other brands like Sony, Nikon. They will make hybrid stuff and will be getting popular and popular. So Canon is often the first one to make lenses because they make a lot of lenses, but I think the competition is going to catch up quite fast. What accessories do you need for hybrid shooting? There are many accessories available, but which one are the most important ones? And which accessories are not that essential to hybrid shooting, but are still fun to use? A question that I get a lot is, do I need a filter for my lens for hybrid photography and video? The short answer is yes, you need one. There are many types of filters, so let us focus on the most important ones. Let's start with a polarization filter. What does a polarization filter do? You're probably not going to expect this one, but it polarizes light. This means you get a less reflection from shiny surfaces. Think of a window, water, or even a bald head that reflects light. Like a groom that is bald, it will reflect light, and with a polarization filter you can reduce that reflection. So with a polarization filter you can take away all the shine. It also gives you more color saturation and more contrast in both photo and video. And then we have an ND filter. What does an ND filter do? Well, an ND filter, or a neutral density filter, reduces the amount of light going into the lens. Let us say you want to shoot a longer shutter speed photo of moving water. Very great example. But you're going to shoot it during the day. So you want the water to become blurry, so it moves, but during the day there's too much light to shoot a photo with a long shutter speed. So you want to slow down that shutter speed, but you cannot because of too much light. So you have to reduce the light going into the lens with an ND filter. This is what an ND filter does. It reduces the light that hits the sensor, basically. And that way you can use a longer shutter speed, so you get that moving water effect during the day while shooting a photo. An ND filter works in stops. So the more stops you use, the less light enters the lens. This means you need a longer shutter speed or a higher ISO, etc. to compensate the less light you get into the camera. So if you shoot hybrid weddings like I do, the light is continuously changing. So inside a venue, there's a way different light than outside the venue. It's a big difference. You need a variation in ND filters. And you probably already know what I'm going to say right now. You need a variable ND filter, also called a VND. So what does a variable ND filter do? It does the same thing as a normal ND filter. It produces light going into the lens, but with a rotating ring. You can adjust the stops step by step on the ring. Often they start with -2 stops and go up 3, 4, 5 or even more stops to reduce the light going into the camera. In case you don't know, everything about cameras and light is calculated in stops. If you never heard of it, I recommend looking up a video about how stops work because it's very interesting. Well, in my opinion, a variable ND filter is a must for hybrid shooting. And that's because of video and the settings you use for video. And I often get the question, what happens to my photos because I make the image darker? Well, if you use a variable ND filter when shooting photos, you don't have to worry, because if you can shoot video, you can also shoot photo. And you can compensate with your ISO, shutter speed, etc. to compensate with the light. And have you ever heard of mist filters? Well, mist filters scatter the light before it reaches the sensor. So highlights become way softer, contrasts become softer, skin tones look more smooth because the light gets broken. The image gets a very dreamy look. If you can do this in post, for example, in After Effects or in DaVinci Resolve, it's not the same if you do it in camera, if you do it with a filter. I prefer to do everything in camera. I can do it afterwards, but I like the fact that I can do it in camera and have that dreaminess already baked into the shot. You can even find filters that combine multiple effects. For example, a variable ND filter with polarization. For example, a variable ND filter with polarization and even mist in one filter. or an ND filter combined with a mist filter, or a polarization filter combined with mist filter. There's all kind of variations on filters. So what are great brands for filters? Well, the ones I've used, the ones I like the most are Polar Pro filters. You got Freewell, is way cheaper. Tiffen, KNF, get a lot of brands in filters. I personally think Tiffen and Polar Pro are the best for what I do, but you can check out the other ones. They're cheaper and still make fine filters. And the reason why I use Tiffen and Polar Pro is because they offer the most natural colors and they don't mess around with my camera color space that much, and that's why I like them the most. One of the most important accessories for your cameras are memory cards. So what memory card do you need for hybrid shooting photo and video? Well, it depends on the camera you have and what kind of type of memory card your camera uses, but I always say choose the fastest card available. Slow cards will give you buffer problems. I use Sony G cards, that's the TUF series. I have also tried Angelbird and SanDisk and all kind of brands, and they're fine, but my go-to memory cards are Sony TUFs. And that's for a guy that uses Canon. Especially the Sony SD G cards have a 300 read and write speed, and that's really fast. Also very expensive, but if you want to buy a very fast camera, you need a very fast SD card. So my camera uses a CF Express card. That's about 1700 read and 500 write. So that's a very fast card. Especially the SD cards are the bottleneck for a lot of cameras. So just spend money, buy the fastest card, and your problems will be solved. It just gives you so much more freedom as a hybrid shooter because you shoot a lot of data. So what size card do you need for hybrid shooting? Because you shoot a lot of data, and I recommend at least 128 gigabytes, but preferably double that or even quadruple that because you produce a lot of data. And also a very important thing for hybrid shooting is batteries. And often people don't really think about the batteries, but I think you really have to think about what batteries you use. What batteries do you use for hybrid shooting? Use original batteries. Do not buy imitation batteries. They can cause all kinds of problems, firmware problems, software problems. They often do not deliver the same power as original batteries, and you will run into all kinds of problems. On a wedding day, I will use around 5 to 6 batteries for a whole wedding day. So I have around 12 batteries, so I'm safe for the whole wedding day. What light source do you need for hybrid shooting, photo and video? You will need a flash or speedlight for weddings. Profoto is a well-known brand for high-quality flashes. Most of their flashes or speedlights also have a video light built in, and that is very useful when you're shooting a hybrid wedding. So on the dance floor you can put on the light of your film light and you can shoot video and photo at the same time. Because sometimes you will need more light, and to have a built-in video light in your flash is just awesome. But Profoto is very expensive, so when you're starting out, I don't know if it's the best brand to buy. There are other brands like Newer, but if you want to spend money, I think the Profotos are just top tier for shooting hybrids. You can also use a LED tube. I always have LED tubes in my camera bag, even use them right here in my studio to give me a rim light. And they're great for shooting during a wedding day or shooting hybrids. You can hold it while creating extra light, for example during dancing. And I like to keep things simple. Modern cameras can handle high ISO, so most of the time light is not a big problem. So how to record audio when shooting hybrid photography and video? Let us first talk about what audio you want to record. If you want to record audio directly in your camera, you will usually use a shotgun mic on your camera. It's connected to your camera and starts recording when you start filming. It's directional, so it will start recording in the same direction as your lens is pointed. They call this a run and gun mic. So the setup with your camera and microphone is a run and gun setup. For example, the Rode VideoMic Pro that I use, the audio I record with that microphone will be inside the video file when you import it into your video editor. So you will have a dedicated audio track that will have the recordings of what you recorded with your separated run and gun mic. The second way to record audio is with a lavalier mic. Lavalier mics are attached to a person, like I have right here. I don't know if you can see it. So I'm using this one, it's hidden under my shirt and records audio while I'm speaking. It records audio very close to the source. You can attach it to clothing, to a person like me. You can place it almost anywhere. Most of the time it uses a 3.5mm connector for the mic, and a good lavalier mic has a locking system. So you can lock it in the recorder so you don't accidentally pull it out when recording. You have wired and wireless versions. For example, a Tascam is wired. Well, this Tascam is wired. It's a great system, has 3 AAA batteries. It's very simple and very reliable. Or the Rode wireless setup I'm using right now, which is very convenient, but also very reliable. But choosing a wireless mic, very important that you have an auto sync function. This is important because you often connect it to the bride or groom when you're not near the receiver. So when they arrive at the ceremony, it automatically connects to your receiver and you know the audio will be recorded. It's a great feature of this Rode setup, and more brands have this kind of setups. The third way to record audio is with audio recorder. For example, I have a Tascam audio recorder. You will use it to tap into the original ceremony mic, for instance. Usually there is an audio input with an output from the device. You can plug it into the recorder and the recorder will capture the audio. It will record on an SD card. Sometimes you can use the system of the venue. Sometimes there's a separate system for the ceremony. It depends on the wedding. But the great thing is you can record audio directly from the source without putting microphones anywhere. What you want is a reliable audio brand like Rode, Sennheiser or Tascam, and there are many more brands, but those brands are very good and they know what they're doing. They purposely built microphones for the things you want to use them for. But these are the brands I personally use. They are more expensive, but good audio saves you a lot of hassle. A pro tip, always use a backup audio. Even I have a little microphone over here that records a backup track. Even in my camera there's an extra backup track. Because when I run a gun mic, maybe I pull out the 3.5mm, it can happen still. I lost my sound or there's something going wrong. I have a backup audio recording of what I'm doing. And that's, I think, very important about hybrid shooting. Always think in backups. Is there a backup? Do I have a second backup? Just use fail safes so you know you have double audio. And even in my run and gun mic, I have a double track. So it records in a normal volume and in a lesser volume. So I have a, for in case there's people shouting, I have a less volume track that records on softer level, and every time I edit I have to use that second track because people are shouting so loud that it becomes too loud for the mic, and I can use the second track to use that audio. Do you need a cage or gimbal for hybrid shooting? No matter how good the in-body stabilization of your camera is, chances are you will run into problems with stabilization, especially with moving shots, long shots or shots where you move yourself. So let us start with the cage. If you're not going to use a run and gun mic, a cage is not a must. But if you want extra stability and want to attach a run and gun mic, then yes. If you want more interesting angles, then yes. On my Canon R5 Mark II, I use a small rig, Black Mamba, with a hot shoe. It's a half cage and I use the handle backwards. This is perfect for extra stabilization and different shooting angles when I'm shooting weddings. Is there a downside? Yeah, it's really heavy. Gimbals are also used by a lot of videographers. You can use a gimbal with or without a cage. The problem is that it does not work great for photography. You can still use it during a moment like dinners or a photo shoot or a ceremony. On moments you don't have to react very fast. You can use a quick lock system or something to put your camera on the gimbal and shoot some gimbal shots and release it when you need the camera. If you are going to use a gimbal, plan your shots. Know what you're going to do. That way you know when and how to use it in the proper way. A pro tip, embrace that you are shooting hybrid. Most of the time you'll be shooting handheld, so work on your camera movement and make sure your body is more stable. You can stabilize footage afterwards in DaVinci Resolve Studio. Some cameras even provide the data of their stabilization system, but it's always better to make sure your footage is already stabilized when going into the camera. But it's always better to shoot a stable shot instead of fixing it in post-production. What are the photo camera settings for hybrid shooting, photography and video? I will show you the general settings that are basically the same across all brands. The names of the settings may differ per brand, and if your camera does not have a specific setting, don't worry. I was shooting hybrid in 2010 with a dinosaur and I still got great shots. I will use my Canon R5 Mark II as an example to show you the settings I use because it's a purpose-built hybrid camera. I think it has all the settings you need as a hybrid shooter. So let us start with the file handling. C RAW. also known as compressed RAW or Canon RAW, is a light version of RAW. I don't know if Canon means compressed RAW or Canon RAW. I guess compressed RAW. Sony, Fuji and Nikon also offer lossless compressed RAWs. Just like Canon, they have a solution for a lighter version of your RAW. And why is that? Well, cameras produce bigger and bigger files. A lighter version is easier to manage, especially when shooting photo and video. You generate a lot of data, like I said before, and it's just easier for the camera to write those files on a regular memory card. Another important reason is buffer problems. When shooting in burst mode, you can shoot up to 30 or 35 photos per second. If those files are very large, the buffer fills up very quickly. If you then switch to video, you can run into problems. Your camera isn't ready to shoot video because it's still processing the photos. That is why compressed RAW works very well. I've been using it for 2 years right now and I have never had any issues with my RAW files. Yes, I could see a difference when I zoom in Lightroom between a normal RAW file and a C-RAW file, but in real world use, nobody notices the differences. Even photographers don't notice the difference. And the next important thing is where are you storing your photos in camera. If your camera has 2 memory card slots, like I think you should have if you're shooting hybrid, I always choose both cards. No matter what, safety and file security always are #1 priority. So which camera mode do I use for hybrid shooting? Let us break it down into 3 most used modes. Manual mode, AV mode and programmable mode. Manual mode is the best option if you want the full control. I use manual mode when the light conditions are good and when I'm not in a rush. Manual mode allows maximum creativity, but there's a downside. When shooting hybrid, it takes more time to set it up. Even as an experienced photographer, it takes time to dial into the correct exposure. At weddings, light conditions can change in an instant. If you combine this with video, you can end up chasing your own settings instead of controlling the light. That's why I only use manual when I know the light conditions are very stable and there's no pressure on me to make a certain shot. So what is the other option? Well, that's AV mode. AV mode is not what many people think it is. It's often seen as a fully automatic mode used by people who don't know how to photograph, but AV mode is programmable. It differs per camera, but this is how I set up mine. I use auto ISO with a maximum of 6400 ISO. My exposure meter is always 1 stop below, so below 0. Sometimes 1 stop and a half. Well, you can't go in a half, but 1 stop and a third or 1 stop and 2/3, because a stop is 3 steps. My shutter speed cannot go below 1/125 and it can go as high as needed. Because when I'm shooting manual, my shutter speed is almost always 1/125, so this matches perfectly in AV mode. The camera prefers the lowest shutter speed as possible when in AV mode, so because it can't adjust my shutter speed lower, it will adjust my ISO. And if you combine it with a variable ND filter, I got a very solid base to shoot photos. And that means I shoot very close to how I would shoot manually. But if there's a sudden bright light, the shutter speed increases and saves the image. The aperture is manual in AV mode, so I set it exactly to how I want it to be. This way I can rely on the camera still to stay consistent when switching to video and back to photo. I've made a very detailed video about using AV mode, and if you're interested in that, go to the description below. You can find a full video about why I think AV mode is just awesome. The last mode is programmable mode, or C mode on Canon. This differs per camera, but most cameras have 1, 2 or 3 programmable slots. These allow you to store pre-programmed settings for specific situations. The usual workflow is this. Set your camera in manual mode, dial in the settings you want to use, go to the menu for the programmable modes, store it in program 1, 2 or 3. When you switch to that mode, everything is instantly set in that setting. For example, when I shoot group photos, I set my camera to a shutter speed of 1/250, aperture mode about f9, ISO auto. When I switch to that program, my camera is instantly set up for group photos, because I know the photos will be consistent and safe. And a pro tip, always make sure your camera does not suffer from buffer problems, because if you do, look into faster memory cards or adjust the settings. What are the video camera settings for hybrid photography and video? I will show you the general settings that are basically the same across all the brands. Terms and settings may differ per brand or even per type of camera within one brand, but I will make it as basic and as general as I can be. Video is often more intimidating for photographers, but if you look at it like this, video is exactly the same as photography. Just add some FPS, frames per second, into the mix, and that's it. Once you understand frames per second and a few basic rules you already know from photography, nothing is holding you back from making great videos. And remember, there is no right or wrong when learning about photography or videography. So if you know a lot about photography or videography, you might feel that I'm skipping information or not fully completing everything. That is intentional. I want to explain this in a simple, basic and very understandable way. I do not want to go too deep and into complex stuff. First, you need to understand the basics before you go into the under layers, and still you don't really have to if you understand the basics, I think, because video doesn't have to be that complex. So let us start with the video profile settings. Just like photography, video has different file types. A raw photo from a Canon is called a CR3 file. A raw file from Sony is an ARW file. The same principle applies to video. In a video, you also have RAW files. RAW video gives you control over the white balance, tint, ISO, and much more. Also, Canon has RAW video files called CRM files. So if you look at a camera brand like Red, which only make video cameras, they call their RAW files R3D files. Standard video files use more familiar formats like MP4 or MOV, movie file. Just like in photography, you might think you always want to shoot RAW video, right? But here's the problem. If your camera can shoot RAW video, the files become huge. We shoot log. Technically, log is still a form of RAW-based recording, but it works differently. And that is what I will explain in the next part. Let us break down a log file. A log file is built of three things: the log file type, the color space, and the codec. Let us start with the log file type. The log file type defines the tone curve and dynamic range. Canon offers multiple log options depending on the camera. For instance, you have C-Log, C-Log 2 and C-Log 3. I use C-Log 2 because it has the most dynamic range and works the best for my color grading. A C stands of course for Canon, Canon log. A log file can still have a MP4 or a MOV extension, just like a standard video file. Next is the color space. The color space defines the color range of the file. The most used is Rec. 709. You've probably heard of that one. You can compare it to a sRGB in a photo camera setting. Some brands offer multiple color spaces. I use C Gamut, which stands for Canon Gamut, because it has a wider color space than Rec. 709. Then we have the codec types. The codec defines the compression of the file. It determines the file type, and this is one of the biggest challenges in video. More information means better quality, but also bigger files. Each camera manufacturer uses different interpretations of the codecs. Even within one brand, cheaper or more expensive cameras use different codecs. That's why codecs can be very confusing. As an example, let's dive into my Canon R5 Mark II to see what options I have. I go to my menu settings of image quality or video quality. Every camera has similar options. If I say something incorrect here, please let me know. I'm trying to simplify something that can be very complex. So when you go to your image quality settings in your video settings, you can choose your codec file. Sony may call it file format, Nikon calls it video file type, I guess. Fuji calls it movie file type. The names differ, but the outcome is the same. And yes, I can choose RAW. RAW is simply a codec with minimal compression. That is why RAW video creates massive files. If you look at the other options, they are all codecs with compression. Each level of compression sacrifices something, reduce the file size. It's up to you to decide if that trade-off works for your workflow or you want to do something different. So what codec should you choose for hybrid shooting? Well, there are several ways to find out. The best way is to test it. Test in low light. So put your camera on a certain codec and start testing your camera. Test in low light, test in bright light to test the dynamic range of that codec. Import the footage in your video editor to check out if you like how it looks, if it's not too compressed or it's just perfect for your workflow, and also check how large the files can get on your computer, because it can get quite large. Some computers will struggle with certain codecs, but the best way is to have a great codec from the start without converting your codecs. Another option is to look up other creators using the same camera, but that means you are copying someone else. When you test it yourself, you gain a real feeling and understanding of what you're doing or what you're doing wrong. Testing in a controlled environment gives you a lot of confidence. A very practical way to test codecs is this, and I will show it on my camera. So right now in my camera I have an empty 265GB card. And if I select raw video, I can check the available recording time. It shows 0 minutes. That means I likely need an external recorder to record video files on my Canon R5. I cannot even record on a big memory card. If I choose the second codec option, I suddenly get around 2 hours of recording time. As I move down the codec list, I'll trade image quality for longer recording times. And do not panic, even the lowest codec will look great, or probably look great. Most clients watch their video on their phones. Some watch on televisions, but not everyone owns a big ass OLED television with the latest, best quality of panel. So test different codecs and see what works the best for you. Different codecs means there are differences in color grading, your workflow, but if it works for you, it's good for you. What are the perfect FPS settings to shoot hybrid? FPS, or frames per second, is the number of frames the camera records in 1 second. This is where a lot of photographers struggle, because they don't really fully understand the differences and the mistakes related to the shutter speed. To fully understand this, we need to start at the beginning. And when we start at the beginning, you have to start at the difference between PAL and NTSC. PAL is PAL, NTSC is NTSC. Your camera has an option for PAL and NTSC, and this directly influences your FPS. But what are PAL and NTSC? That's to do with the frequency of the power grid in your house. What comes out of your power outlet is either 50 or 60 Hz. The US and Japan started with a 60 Hz system back in the days, so they use the NTSC system. Europe uses a 50 Hz system and therefore uses PAL. Besides that, there is a mix of PAL and NTSC systems all over the world, but they reduced it to a PAL or an NTSC system. That is why your camera allows you to switch between NTSC and PAL. So what does Hertz actually mean? If I connect a light bulb to a Dutch power outlet, because I'm Dutch, you probably didn't hear that, it runs at 50 Hz. That means the light turns on and off 50 times per second. Because our brain works in a similar frequency, we do not see the light flicker. My wife, she's American, and when she plugs in a lamp, it flickers 60 times per second. Sometimes there is something between the lamp and the outlet, like a converter, that can interfere with our frequency, but more on that later. So logically, as a Dutch person, I would use a PAL 50 Hz system. But there's a problem. Most online content is published on platforms based in the US, and they use an NTSC system as their standard. That is why your video can look strange on platforms like Instagram Reels. For example, you record a PAL video at 25 frames per second. That is the standard playback speed of a PAL system. You edit and export your video on a 25 frames per second timeline, you upload the video to your Instagram, and the video does not look great. That is because the platform prefers NTSC, and NTSC runs at 29.97 frames per second, which we usually call 30 frames per second. So the platform wants 30 frames, but you delivered 25 frames. You are missing almost 5 frames per second. That is why your video can look stuttery. So how do we solve this? Well, it's very simple. Put your camera in NTSC mode. Nothing will break. You are simply recording in that preferred frame rate. Another option is to shoot PAL at 50 frames per second and convert it to 30 frames in editing. So what frames per second options are there? I will keep it very simple. You have 24 frames per second, while technically it's 23.98 frames per second for that classic film look. You have 25 frames per second for PAL, the native PAL basic play speed. They have the 30 frames per second, that's the version of NTSC, the standard playback. Then you have 50 frames per second and 60 frames per second. There are 2 times slow motion. And then you have 100 frames per second or 120 frames per second, because you double everything. You get a 4 times slow motion speed. These are the most common options. I mostly shoot at NTSC using 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second because it works better for social media and editing, but sometimes you will see light flicker in your camera screen. Later in this video, in the chapter about problems with hybrid shooting, I will go deeper in this subject. So what ISO do I use with hybrid photography? ISO determines the light sensitivity of the sensor. More ISO means more light. Too much ISO without enough light creates noise. Very important to know. Higher ISOs don't create noise, it's because you don't have enough light. If you have noise, you need to create more light. That means adding a light, like I have here, or increasing existing light. We just covered log files, and if you didn't watch the chapter about log files, I highly recommend first watching that chapter before going in this one, because it's connected to each other. And there's something very important I didn't mention yet, because camera manufacturers specify an optimal ISO for each log file profile. This ISO gives you the best dynamic range. That means you're often locked at a specific ISO. This is one of the main reasons we use a variable ND filter. If you didn't watch that chapter, go watch that first. With other words, start at the beginning of the video and you will learn a lot about setting up your camera right for hybrid shooting or video in general. It allows you to keep the ISO constant. So what if we need more light? The best solution is to use lights. If that isn't possible, you double your ISO. So I shoot with Canon C-Log II. Canon recommends an ISO of 800 for the best dynamic range. If I need more light, I double it to 1600, 3200, 6400, etc. That way I preserve as much dynamic range as possible. So what shutter speed do I use for hybrid shooting? Shutter speed works the same in video as it works in photography. It controls how long each frame is exposed to light. If your shutter speed is too low, you get smearing or ghosting in motion. This can be a creative effect and is worth testing, but not everybody wants it. If your shutter speed is too high, the image looks very sharp and very unnatural. This is often described as jittery. You also get it if you drink a lot of coffee. You start to see gaps between frames. To avoid this, we use the 180 shutter rule. The shutter speed should be double the frame rate. So if I shoot at 25 FPS, I should use 1/50 as a shutter speed. If I shoot at 50 FPS, I use 1/100 shutter speed. But what if your ISO and log combination makes the image too bright? Then you need to reduce the light. You can close the aperture. You can use a variable ND filter. There is that variable ND filter again. Or if needed, you can increase the shutter speed. For example, instead of 1/150, I go to 1/100 or 1/200. But be aware of that high shutter speed because it can make your image look very jittery. So what aperture do I use for hybrid shooting? Aperture works the same in video as in photography. A wider aperture, meaning a smaller f-number, creates more background blur, or bokeh like we call it in photography. A smaller aperture means a larger f-number. It creates more depth. The best aperture depends on what you want to show. It depends on the available light. If you want a subject isolation, use a wider aperture. If you want more context in the frame, tell more story, use a smaller aperture. I typically shoot between f2 and f4 when I'm shooting video. How do you prepare for shooting hybrid photo and video? The big secret is the prep work. Gather as much information as possible about the assignment. Visualize what you want to do. Think about which lens, camera and light you will use. Create a shot list that helps you guide through the day. Gather information sounds logical, but too often people go into an assignment without knowing what they are going to do. If you have questions for your client, even simple ones, ask them. I use forms that couples can fill in with basic information. This way I already know a lot before the assignment even starts. And also I want to know the location. Is it one location? Is it multiple locations? What kind of lighting will be there? When does everything happen? When is the ceremony? Where is the main light coming from? I want to visualize everything beforehand. When I have this information, I feel much more confident. I know which camera settings I will use for the photo and for video. By visualizing, I create a clear plan for the day. Even though a wedding is spontaneous, I know how a wedding day will usually flow. That allows me to anticipate moments and take advantages of them when needed. Within that concept, I think about lenses, filters, lights, camera choices, everything. One thing that really helps a lot is a shot list. Write down the shots you want to capture, especially during photo shoots. Some photographers or even videographers freeze and do not know what they want to do. Look up posters online if needed. Write them down. By writing them down, it stays in your head, and you can easily check if you captured everything you wanted. How to get smooth handheld photos and video shots. When shooting hybrid, I always start with my left arm. I place my camera on the palm of my hand and my elbow is against my body. It's my second contact point. The first is the camera, my hand. The second contact point is my elbow in my side. With my right hand on the camera is the third contact point. And you want at least 3 contact points on your camera. This allows you to switch between landscape and portrait very easily. It also prevents pain in your hands in the end of the day and also back pain. The camera rests in the palm of your hand instead of being held with tension. If you grip the camera incorrectly, it takes much more energy. Your arms will start to hurt very quickly, and with a proper hand placement you can hold your camera for hours. This technique turns your body into a human tripod, and that's what you want to be, a human tripod. Also learn how to move your body smoothly. Practice panning and tilting, and practice often. The more you practice, the better you get at it. What problems can you encounter when shooting hybrid? The most important one is buffer problems. Every time you take a photo or record video, the camera has to write data to the memory card. When you shoot in burst mode, for instance, the camera produces a large amount of data. It can only write as fast as the memory card allows you to write. If the buffer is full, you cannot switch fast enough between photo and video. There are a few ways to solve this. First, buy the fastest memory card possible. I use Sony TUF G cards. They are expensive and extremely fast. But hey, they work and they do what they have to do. Other brands also offer fast cards, but in my experience, the Sony cards are flawless. They simply make my camera work better. Also use original batteries. Imitation batteries can cause a lot of problems or deliver insufficient power. This can slow down your camera and reduce the buffer problems. To reduce buffer problems, it helps to shoot in C-RAW or a light version of RAW. And do not worry, the quality remains excellent. Well, in my case, I use a Canon. If I use C-RAW, it's perfect. And the difference in editing is minimal. The file size is smaller, but the results will look great. Another problem is accidentally changing settings on your camera. This happens to me on almost every shoot. I accidentally press a button and wonder how or what happened to my camera. This is why I keep a list on my phone with all my base camera settings. Some cameras, like my Canon R5 Mark II, allow me to save settings on my memory card. So I've saved my base settings on a separate SD card that's in my bag. If something goes wrong, I simply reload those settings and the camera instantly is back in the base settings and all my problems are dissolved. Another common issue is flickering lights. Flickering lights happen when your shutter speed does not sync with your light frequency. If you see flickering, adjust your shutter speed to match or double that of your frame rate. If the problem doesn't get resolved, manually adjust your shutter speed until your flickering goes away. Another issue is chunky or blurry video. This can happen for several reasons. If your shutter speed is too low, every frame becomes blurry. If your shutter speed is too high, the motion looks very unnatural and very choppy. If footage looks fine on your camera, but bad in your editing timeline, your timeline FPS does not match up with your footage. Always make sure your timeline frame rate matches your recording footage. In the beginning of the video, you saw this is my ultimate hybrid photo and video camera setup. It weighs 3.5 kilograms or 7.7 pounds. The body is a Canon R5 Mark II. The lens is an RF 2870 f2.0 USM. The filter is a Polar Pro 95mm variable ND with polarization and mist. And behind that is an adapter ring that took me ages to find to fit this lens. I use the fastest SD card and the fastest CF Express cards available for my camera. These are the Sony TUF G cards. And yes, I'm a Canon fanboy, but I do appreciate Sony technology, especially my PlayStation 5. The cage is a small rig Black Mamba. It's a half cage, so it's not a full cage. Combined with a reversed hog lock system, it's a quick release system, and a Rode VideoMic Pro Plus. This camera setup allows me to shoot cinematic video shots and switch to a high-end photo camera in milliseconds. And mainly this is because of the superior quality of the lens. The photos look like they were shot with a prime lens, although I still miss my prime lenses when shooting hybrid, which is a very important thing for me. This setup is perfect for me and my style of hybrid shooting. In this video, I did not talk about post-production, because that would make this video even longer. If you are interested in a detailed video about the full post-production? Let me know in the comments. If you appreciate the time and effort that went into making this video and this much requested video, I would love to see some support from you because I went a lot of time in making this video. I hope this video really helps on your journey to become a hybrid photographer or videographer or a hybrid shooter in general. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments. If you spot an error, feel free to point it out. Even I make errors because there's a lot of information and sometimes I just fluff things up or things get lost in translation because yes, I'm a dyslexic. Not speaking in my native language, so I can mess things up. And I'm reading from a teleprompter and being dyslexic is quite a problem. But I wanted to give you the best information I could give, so the teleprompter is the best way. And I'd like to see you next time and let me know what other hybrid videos you would like to see.